Everyone froze when Steven Seagal called Ronda Rousey just a TV fighter. He thought he had humiliated her and put her in her place, but in the ring he regretted it in front of millions. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. The ballroom of the Las Vegas Convention Center glowed with harsh white light that reflected off polished floors and banners strung from the ceiling, each one emblazoned with the logo of the upcoming martial arts tournament. Reporters crowded into every available space, their camera lenses gleaming like eyes that never blinked, always waiting to capture a stumble, a slip, or the smallest spark of drama. The hum of anticipation was palpable. Voices overlapping in dozens of languages, keyboards clattering as early stories were filed. Everyone in that room knew the evening was supposed to be a celebration of martial arts culture. But they also knew that when so many egos gathered under one roof, celebration could easily turn to confrontation. On the stage at the front of the room, a long table with microphones awaited the invited guests. At the far end, Steven Seagal emerged first. His presence was theatrical without any need for words. He wore a deep black GI under a tailored jacket, his trademark ponytail slicked neatly down his back, dark glasses covering his eyes though the event was indoors. Moving with the deliberate calm of someone who wanted to be noticed without seeming to seek attention, he lowered himself into a chair and adjusted the microphone with the slow certainty of a man who believed the world would wait for him to speak. Moments later, Ronda Rousey entered from the opposite side. Her attire was a sharp contrast to Seagal's. A simple fitted training jacket, hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail. No elaborate entrance, no entourage. She moved with the brisk confidence of an athlete who had spent her life in arenas larger and more hostile than this one. The flashes of cameras intensified at her arrival, reporters leaning forward as though the oxygen in the room had shifted. She gave a small, polite nod and sat down, folding her hands on the table in front of her. Her eyes, though calm, betrayed focus and readiness. The moderator welcomed the audience, his voice booming through the sound system, though he hardly needed a microphone over the restless buzz of the press. He spoke of the legacy of martial arts, of the tournament's intention to honor tradition and modern innovation. But the words were little more than background noise. Everyone in that ballroom was waiting for the two figures at opposite ends of the table to speak, and everyone knew the evening's headline would not come from ceremonial speeches, but from sparks thrown between egos. A journalist from a sports network raised her hand and received the first question. "Mr. Seagal," she began, leaning into her microphone, "this tournament has been billed as a historic gathering of martial arts legends. How do you view the participation of figures like Chuck Norris, Ronda Rousey, and other champions from different disciplines?" Seagal adjusted his glasses, letting a long pause stretch across the room. His voice, when it came, was low and deliberate. Each word dragged out like a measured strike. "I have spent 4 decades immersed in the essence of Aikido, studying in Japan with true masters, absorbing traditions that most of these people cannot even begin to understand. Some of them," he gestured vaguely with a broad hand, "they learned how to throw a kick for the camera. That is not martial arts. That is choreography." A ripple moved through the crowd of journalists, a sharp intake of breath. Seagal had not yet named names, but the implication was obvious. The moderator shifted uncomfortably, but before he could redirect, another reporter called out, "And what about Ronda Rousey, sitting right here next to you?" Seagal turned his head slightly, not enough to take off his glasses, but enough to suggest the weight of his gaze. His mouth curved in what might have been a smile, though it carried no warmth. "Ronda, she is a talented athlete, I suppose. But let's not confuse athletic spectacle with martial mastery. She is just a television fighter, a product designed for pay-per-view audiences and marketing campaigns. Nothing more." The room erupted in murmurs. The phrase "just a television fighter" seemed to hang in the air like smoke. A dozen camera flashes went off at once, capturing Ronda's reaction, though her expression didn't change. She sat motionless, shoulders relaxed, her gaze steady on some unseen point beyond the sea of reporters. Seagal wasn't finished. His voice gained strength, feeding off the reaction. "There is no place in serious martial arts for theatrics, and certainly no place for women who think throwing a few people around in the octagon makes them masters. Real martial arts is subtlety, discipline, and harmony, not media stunts. Gas rippled through the audience. Some journalists exchanged wide-eyed glances, already knowing how easily those words could be clipped into sound bites. Phones buzzed throughout the room as assistants live-tweeted the remarks. Hashtags were born in seconds. Re-hero, television fighter. Ra-iyo, no place for women. Another journalist pressed forward. Ms. Rousey, do you have a response to Mr. Seagal's remarks? Dozens of microphones tilted in her direction. The air felt charged, as though every person in the room leaned toward her in unison. But Ronda remained still. She offered no rebuttal, no counter-argument. She simply picked up her water bottle, took a slow sip, and returned it to the table. Her silence seemed louder than any insult. Seagal leaned back in his chair, as though satisfied with his dominance in the exchange. Reporters jotted down his words, some shaking their heads, others smirking at the drama they knew would dominate headlines. The moderator attempted to move the event forward, asking questions about the tournament schedule and rules, but the mood had already shifted. The press conference was no longer about the event. It was about the fissure that had just opened on stage. Seagal continued to answer with long, self-aggrandizing monologues about his training, his philosophy, his belief that true martial artists didn't need to prove themselves in barbaric competitions. Each sentence was bait, and the reporters eagerly took it. Throughout it all, Ronda sat in perfect composure. She didn't frown, didn't smirk, didn't let a single reaction betray her thoughts. When the conference drew to a close and the moderator thanked everyone, she rose from her seat before anyone else, gave a polite nod to the audience, and left the stage without a word. Her silence was its own kind of thunder. The cameras followed her departure, capturing every step as she exited the ballroom. Some reporters shouted after her, desperate for even a single phrase. Ronda, do you think women belong in martial arts? Do you have a response to Seagal? Do you think you'll prove him wrong in the ring? She offered nothing, only the sound of her footsteps fading into the corridor. In the press room, attention lingered. Seagal remained at his seat, basking in the afterglow of controversy, while journalists rushed to file stories with the incendiary quotes. Within minutes, the internet would explode with memes and video clips, each one repeating his most venomous line, "Just a television fighter." By the time the evening ended, the narrative was already set. Seagal's dismissive arrogance had drawn battle lines, and Ronda's silence had only deepened the mystery of what would happen next. What none of them yet realized was that the silence would prove more dangerous than any insult hurled across a press table. It was the calm before a storm that would soon outgrow the press conference, the arena, and perhaps even the reputations of the legends themselves. The clip of Steven Seagal calling Ronda Rousey just a television fighter spread across the internet like wildfire. Within an hour, it was everywhere, looping on sports networks, reposted on social media with sarcastic commentary, broken into GIFs and memes that mock both Seagal's arrogance and the supposed humiliation of Ronda's silence. On one screen, his words were paired with flashing red captions, "No place for women in martial arts." On another, fans mocked him by replaying her impassive face beside his theatrical tone. Everyone had an opinion, and the debate turned the tournament into the most talked-about event in the martial arts world before it had even begun. But Ronda herself gave nothing. Not a word to reporters waiting outside her hotel, not a single tweet or message on her accounts. While Seagal basked in interviews and phone calls with eager media outlets, she retreated into her own world. The following morning, when most of the city was still waking, she walked into the training hall of her gym. The place was empty except for a janitor sweeping near the doors. The mats stretched across the floor in quiet, shadowed green. The stillness suited her. She set down her bag, removed her jacket, and began stretching. The silence of the hall was broken only by the sound of her breathing and the soft thud of feet against mats as she started her warm-up drills. The previous night's insult replayed itself in her head, not as anger but as fuel. She did not need to rehearse a witty rebuttal. Her body knew the answer, and every throw, every grip, every takedown in practice became a word unspoken but sharpened like a blade. One of her training partners arrived, yawning and apologizing for being late. "You're already sweating," he said with surprise. She nodded once and motioned him forward. Without explanation, they began sparring, her hands gripping the sleeve of his gi, her weight shifting with trained precision. In seconds, he found himself thrown hard onto the mat. She didn't stop to ask if he was ready again. She simply extended a hand, pulled him up, and repeated the motion. Again and again, faster, harder, until he was panting and grinning in disbelief. "Still thinking about last night?" he asked finally, half joking. Ronda didn't answer. She adjusted her stance and moved again. Silence was her reply, and in that silence was a storm. Across town, Steven Seagal sat in a leather chair on a morning talk show, his face impassive behind his tinted glasses, his voice a steady rumble as he repeated the same narrative he had given the night before. "I have studied with the great masters of Japan. My understanding of true martial arts runs deeper than competition or spectacle. What these modern fighters do, it is a sport. What I do, it is life." The host nodded eagerly, feeding him questions about discipline, about philosophy. Seagal basked in it, repeating his disdain for those who fought for television cameras rather than tradition. By midday, his words and her silence had collided into a cultural firestorm. Fans argued fiercely online. Some echoed Seagal's claim that true martial arts had nothing to do with cage fights and tournaments. Others pointed to Ronda's Olympic medals, her dominance in mixed martial arts, her iconic status as the first woman to headline UFC cards, and dismissed Seagal as a relic clinging to arrogance. It didn't matter where people stood. The important thing was that the world was watching. Reporters tried every angle to get a reaction from her. Cameras lingered outside the gym, hoping to catch a comment between training sessions. One even cornered her near the exit, microphone raised like a weapon. "Ronda, do you have a response to Seagal's remarks?" he asked breathlessly. "Do you think women have a place in martial arts?" She tightened the strap of her gym bag, met his eyes for a second, and walked past without a word. The silence made headlines by itself. "Rousey refuses to respond." That evening, she returned to her hotel room, switched on the lamp by the bedside, and pulled out an old notebook. It was filled with notes from her mother, pages of reminders written years ago when training seemed endless and victories uncertain. "Discipline matters more than words," one line read. Another, "Let them talk. You will act." She read the words carefully, then closed the book and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. For a moment she thought of Seagal's sneer, his dismissive tone. Then she shook her head. It wasn't him she was fighting. It was doubt, tradition, the wall every woman in her sport had faced at some point. He was only the latest mask of the same old contempt. The next day, the city buzzed with the tournament's promotional frenzy. Billboards were updated to include Seagal's soundbite in giant block letters. Clips of his press conference appeared in every advertisement reel, contrasted against Ronda's silent departure. Organizers were quick to realize that what had begun as a passing insult had turned into the hook for the entire event. During a promotional shoot, one director whispered to another, "This is better than anything we could have scripted." Seagal was filmed practicing slow, deliberate Aikido movements on stage, narrating over them with phrases about harmony and energy. The footage was immediately edited into trailers, broadcast on every sports channel. But the real moment everyone wanted was Ronda's reply. Every teaser ended the same way. A pause, a black screen, and the question in bold letters, "Will she answer in the ring?" And still she said nothing. Behind the closed doors of her training room, she pushed her body harder. The throws came faster, the grip breaks sharper. Every practice session she invited bigger, stronger partners to resist her. She tested herself against weight, against raw power, against every possible counter. And when she succeeded, she didn't smile. She simply reset and went again. Her coaches noticed the intensity and sometimes tried to intervene. "Ronda, take a breath," one urged. "Save it for the fight." She only shook her head and returned to work. Meanwhile, Seagal doubled down. In another interview, he declared, "She can't answer because she knows it's true. A woman like her doesn't belong in the lineage of martial masters." Clips of his words ran on repeat, sparking anger and disbelief. Feminist commentators condemned him. Traditionalists applauded. Sponsors quietly debated whether the controversy helped or hurt their brand, but the ticket sales told the truth. The arena had sold out in hours. By the end of the week, it was clear. The story had grown larger than either of them. It was no longer just a tournament or a demonstration. It had become a cultural flashpoint. The narrative was simple and irresistible. Arrogance versus discipline, noise versus silence, ego versus resolve. Ronda knew the cameras would keep following her. The reporters would keep pressing her. The world would keep demanding words. But she also knew that her power had never been in what she said. Her power was in the cage, on the mat, in the ring where every doubter fell silent the moment her grip tightened around their arm or throat. She did not need to prove Steven Seagal wrong with a clever retort. She would show the world the answer where it mattered most. When the tournament organizers finally announced that the schedule would include a special demonstration match between Seagal and Rousey, the arena buzzed with electricity. The news spread instantly, and tickets for the showcase were gone within hours. Commentators speculated endlessly, replaying her silence beside his insults. Will she finally respond? They asked. Will she prove him wrong? But Ronda still said nothing. Her silence, far from weakness, had become its own weapon. The more she refused to speak, the more the world leaned in to listen. The more he mocked her, the more people wondered if she would answer in action. And when the night came, when she stepped into the ring opposite the man who had dismissed her very place in the sport, the world would see that silence had not been emptiness. It had been preparation. The tension that had begun with a single insult and had grown through days of silence reached its boiling point when the organizers of the tournament stepped forward to address the storm. What had started as a press conference quote had spiraled into the central drama of the entire event, overshadowing the official fights and demonstrations scheduled for the week. The world no longer cared about the other lineups. It wanted to see what would happen when Steven Seagal and Ronda Rousey finally met face-to-face in the ring. The organizers knew this, and when they called a special press meeting, the cameras swarmed like vultures sensing blood. The ballroom was once again packed, perhaps even more suffocating than before. The journalists were sharper, hungrier, their eyes glowing with the thrill of history about to be made. As the lights dimmed and the spokesman for the tournament walked to the podium, the energy in the room was so electric that the crackle of the microphone caused an eruption of nervous laughter. Everyone knew an announcement was coming, but not its exact form. And then it came, clear and unambiguous. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of the tremendous interest generated this week, we are honored to announce a special demonstration match to take place in our arena. Steven Seagal will showcase his legendary Aikido. Opposite him, Ronda Rousey will bring the strength of her judo and MMA legacy. This is not about titles or championships. It is a demonstration, a meeting of philosophies and techniques. The room exploded. Reporters shouted over one another, microphones shoved forward, flash bulbs firing like lightning in a summer storm. The words "special demonstration match" ricocheted instantly through the digital world. Clips of the announcement were online within minutes, headlines blazing, Seagal vs. Rousey official. The first questions came quickly, all directed at Seagal, who as usual arrived with deliberate calm, wearing his traditional black attire and tinted glasses. He lowered himself into his seat at the press table as though descending onto a throne. The first reporter called out, "Mr. Seagal, do you expect this to be a true test of your art against Rousey's skills?" Seagal's lips twitched into something between a smirk and a sneer. "I don't expect anything. I know what true martial arts is. What I will show the world is what cannot be faked. She is an athlete. She is a spectacle. But in the face of authentic mastery, spectacle collapses." The words hit their target. Reporters scribbled them down furiously, some already chuckling at the audacity. Another voice called out, "Do you believe Ronda Rousey is unworthy of sharing the mat with you?" Seagal leaned closer to the microphone, lowering his voice to a rumble that forced everyone to lean in. "She has her fans. She has her highlight reels. But she has never faced a true master. Not one. She will learn quickly that what she does is a sport, while what I do is an art, and the difference will be clear to everyone watching." The soundbite was devastating in its simplicity, and he knew it. His posture remained calm, but he let the words hang long enough for the weight to settle. Reporters turned eagerly toward the other end of the table where Ronda sat. She was in a Navy training jacket this time, hair pulled back tightly, posture straight and poised. Dozens of cameras angled at her, waiting for a single word. One journalist leaned so far forward he almost toppled his chair. "Ronda, do you have a response to Seagal's remarks? Do you believe this demonstration will prove who is the better fighter?" She folded her hands in front of her, looked up briefly at the room filled with impatient faces, and then down again. The silence stretched. For 5, 10, 15 seconds, she said nothing. Seagal's smirk grew wider, feeding off her refusal to speak. Reporters began muttering nervously, their excitement teetering toward frustration. But just as the murmurs reached a peak, she rose from her chair. Without a word, she bowed politely to the moderator and walked off stage. The cameras tracked her every step. Her retreat as calm and controlled as her arrival. The silence spoke volumes. Within minutes, the internet erupted again. Commentators filled the void with endless interpretations. "She's intimidated. She's waiting to answer in the ring. She's too disciplined to play his game." Memes flooded timelines, some showing Seagal's face with captions like, "The Master Speaks," others portraying Ronda as a silent storm preparing to unleash itself. But everyone agreed on one thing. This was no longer about sport alone. It was philosophy, culture, gender, tradition, all colliding in one match. Backstage, Seagal was still basking in the glow of microphones thrust toward him. "She can walk away," he said with deliberate disdain. "But walking away doesn't change the truth. The world will see what I already know." He leaned back in his chair, enjoying the eager nods of the press. Meanwhile, in a quiet hallway, Ronda moved toward the exit with her coach beside her. He whispered, "You could have said something, anything. Shut him down right there." She shook her head, eyes forward. Words don't win fights. Her coach didn't push further. He had seen this side of her before, the relentless focus that came not from rage but from certainty. Her silence was not avoidance, it was preparation. Outside the arena, fans had already gathered, waving banners and shouting their allegiances. A group of young women held signs that read, "Ronda proves us all," while a cluster of older martial arts enthusiasts held posters of Seagal in dramatic Aikido stances, chanting his name. The clash of generations was alive not only on stage but in the crowd itself. The air was thick with anticipation, the promise of something historic. That night, sports talk shows dissected every second of the press conference. On one channel, commentators replayed Seagal's sneer, while one analyst shook his head. "This is arrogance at its peak. He's dismissing one of the greatest female fighters of all time." Another interrupted, "But isn't that exactly why this sells tickets? Everyone wants to see her prove him wrong, or him prove her place is nothing but hype." Clips of Ronda's silent exit ran in loops, slowed down for dramatic effect, with music layered over her calm departure. On social media, the hashtag #silence speaks trended worldwide. Her refusal to engage had become its own weapon, a counterbalance to Seagal's every insult. The battle lines were clear, arrogance and noise on one side, quiet and steel on the other. As the days ticked down to the tournament, the city itself seemed divided. Posters plastered on the strip bore Seagal's stoic face with the words "Master of Masters." Others showed Ronda in action poses from past fights with the tagline, "Unstoppable." Tourists argued in restaurants, fans debated in bars, and betting pools began forming over what would happen in the demonstration. Would Seagal dominate with his trademark Aikido throws? Would Ronda crush him with a judo takedown? In the gym, Ronda prepared without distraction. Each training session was a storm of movement, partners flying across the mat, submissions snapped on and released before injury. She trained with men heavier and taller than Seagal, each time adjusting, adapting, refining. The noise outside never reached her. She answered questions from her coach with nods, not words. Her teammates whispered among themselves, knowing better than to break her focus. One night, after a particularly grueling session, her coach stopped her as she wrapped her hands. "You know this isn't just a fight. It's become a statement. He's made it about gender, about tradition. You can't just win. You have to win for everyone who believes in you. Ronda looked at him steadily, sweat dripping from her brow. I know. She didn't need to say more. By the time the tournament's opening ceremonies arrived, the demonstration had become the centerpiece, eclipsing even the main event. Commentators reminded the audience of Seagal's most damning quotes, "She's just a television fighter. Women don't belong in martial arts." The crowd roared with outrage or laughter, depending on their loyalties. When they cut to footage of Ronda walking silently into the arena for her first weigh-in, the cheers were deafening. The challenge had been issued. The world had chosen sides. And in less than a week, silence and arrogance would collide under the unforgiving lights of the Las Vegas arena. The night of the event came with a fever that seemed to ripple through Las Vegas itself. Neon lights on the Strip glowed brighter, crowds surged through the streets, and the air hummed with the restless energy of a city about to witness something unforgettable. For weeks, the controversy had grown from a single comment to a cultural firestorm, and now every fan, critic, and casual observer wanted the same thing: to see whether Ronda Rousey's silence would speak louder than Steven Seagal's arrogance. The arena stood like a beacon against the night sky, its colossal screens replaying footage of the press conferences, the insults, the silence, and the official announcement of the demonstration match. Outside the gates, fans lined up holding homemade banners and chanting in alternating waves. One side shouted, "Seagal! Seagal!" while the other countered with, "Ronda! Ronda!" The clash of voices mirrored the very conflict about to unfold inside. Inside the arena, the energy was even more intense. The stage crew hurried to set lights, adjust cables, and position cameras. Commentators rehearsed their opening lines, leaning toward each other with grins of anticipation. "This isn't just another fight," one whispered into his headset. "This is the main event, no matter what the schedule says." The production team nodded. They had seen the ticket sales, the ratings projections, the online buzz. This match had become the heartbeat of the entire tournament. Backstage, Steven Seagal sat in his dressing room, surrounded by assistants and eager journalists. He wore his usual black attire, heavy fabric draped over his broad frame, and his dark glasses still shielded his eyes, though the room was dim. His voice carried with the slow authority he loved to project as he answered questions. "Ronda Rousey is an athlete. She is strong, fast, talented, yes. But she does not understand what true martial arts is. Tonight, I will not fight her. I will educate her. And through her, I will educate the world." The reporters scribbled furiously, their pens chasing each word. One asked if he feared embarrassment against a younger opponent, someone whose prime was fresh and brutal. Seagal's mouth curved into the faintest smile. A master cannot be embarrassed by a student. Tonight, the audience will understand the difference between movement and mastery, between spectacle and truth. His entourage laughed softly, as though the outcome were already decided. Cameras captured his stoic expression, ready to beam his confidence onto millions of screens. Across the hall, the atmosphere was entirely different. Ronda's dressing room was silent, but for the faint rustle of tape being wrapped around her hands and the steady rhythm of her breathing. She sat on a wooden bench, head bowed slightly, as her coach bound her wrists with practiced efficiency. There were no journalists, no cameras. She had barred them all. The room was bare except for a few training mats on the floor and a bottle of water on the counter. Her coach spoke quietly. "He's running his mouth again. Reporters are eating it up. He said you're not even here to fight, as that he'll educate you." Ronda's lips barely moved. "Good. Let him talk." The coach finished rapping and leaned back, studying her. "I know you're focused. I just want to remind you this is bigger than you and him now. The crowd, the media, every woman who's ever been told she doesn't belong, they're all in that ring with you tonight." Ronda raised her eyes, sharp and unwavering. "Then I won't let them down." She stood, rolling her shoulders, testing the feel of the tape. Her mind replayed her training in endless loops. The grips, the throws, the transitions to the ground. Every repetition over the last weeks had been for this moment. Not for Seagal, not for his words, but for the principle itself, that skill and discipline were not bound by gender, that silence could be strength, that arrogance could be shattered by action. Outside, the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, and the crowd roared in response. The earlier matches had ended, but no one spoke of them. The demonstration was all that mattered. The cameras cut to shots of the audience, celebrities in the front row, martial arts legends watching with folded arms, and young fans clutching handmade signs. In Seagal's room, an assistant poked his head in. "It's time, sir." Seagal stood slowly, deliberately, as though rising from meditation. He adjusted his sleeves, nodded once to the room, and walked out with heavy steps, trailed by cameras that captured every second of his solemn procession. The crowd in the arena erupted as his image appeared on the screens. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, his expression unchanged, projecting an aura of inevitability. In Ronda's room, the same call came. "Ronda, you're up." She exhaled, rolled her neck, and walked to the door. Her coach patted her shoulder once. She didn't speak. The cameras swarmed outside, but she ignored them, eyes fixed ahead. Her stride was steady, purposeful. When she entered the corridor leading to the arena, the sound of the crowd reached her in waves, like the ocean pounding against a shore. The announcer's voice thundered again. "And now, for the demonstration the world has been waiting for, Steven Seagal versus Ronda Rousey." The lights in the arena dimmed, spotlights sweeping dramatically across the mat. Seagal entered first, moving with slow grandeur, bowing stiffly to the audience before taking his place. His supporters cheered wildly, some chanting his name. He removed his outer robe, revealing a crisp G beneath, and settled into a stance that exuded calm superiority. The music shifted. Ronda's name was called. The arena exploded with noise, cheers, applause, chants of her name. She emerged in a simple training outfit, no theatrics, no entourage. Her gaze was steady, her jaw firm. She bowed once to the crowd and stepped onto the mat opposite Seagal. The contrast could not have been greater. He, the embodiment of arrogance and tradition, twisted into spectacle. She, the embodiment of discipline and silence, sharpened into steel. They faced each other as the announcer explained the rules. It was a demonstration, not a sanctioned fight. The goal was to showcase styles, not to seek a knockout. But the crowd knew better. They had not come for demonstration. They had come for a reckoning. Seagal inclined his head with a smug smile. "You don't belong here," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. Ronda said nothing. She dropped into her stance. Eyes locked on his. The referee signaled. The demonstration began. The arena, which had been a storm of noise, fell into a tense hush. Every spectator leaned forward, every camera zoomed in, every heartbeat seemed to sync with the rhythm of the fighters as they prepared to test words against silence. And with that first step toward each other, the storm finally broke. The mat gleamed under the white-hot lights, every reflection captured by the lenses of dozens of cameras circling like vultures above the arena. The noise of the crowd was deafening, yet beneath the roar lay a current of tension so sharp it could cut the air itself. Steven Seagal stood tall, his arms folded across his chest as though this were a lecture he was about to deliver, rather than a contest. His eyes, hidden behind those dark glasses, never left Ronda Rousey, who moved with the quiet intensity of a predator circling in silence. The referee raised a hand, looking from one to the other, then stepped back, signaling that the demonstration had begun. Seagal shifted into his stance, deliberate and methodical. His voice carried across the small space between them, low but amplified by the silence that swept the arena. "You see, true martial arts is not about brute strength or speed. It is about control. It is about teaching one's opponent their place." His tone was dripping with condescension, each word aimed not at his student, but at his audience. Cameras zoomed in, eager to capture the disdain etched in his features. Ronda did not reply. Her jaw was set, her eyes fixed on him. She took one slow breath, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, her silence louder than his words. The crowd, sensing the clash of philosophies, hushed into an anticipatory stillness. Seagal stepped forward, his movements flowing as he reached out to capture her wrist, the signature Aikido grip that had sent countless cooperative partners spinning to the ground in staged demonstrations. But Ronda's body shifted with trained precision, her hand slipping away from his grasp before it could close. The evasion was simple, efficient, almost casual, yet the effect rippled through the audience like a shockwave. Seagal frowned, adjusting his footing, and tried again, this time faster, sharper. His hand darted forward, but once again Ronda evaded, pivoting smoothly to the side, her stance unshaken. Gasps broke from the crowd, followed by scattered applause. Ronda remained silent, her eyes locked on his, the calm storm to his swelling frustration. "You must engage," Seagal snapped, his composure slipping, his voice carrying across the arena. "This is not a game of avoidance. Face me properly if you dare." Ronda's answer came not in words but in motion. She stepped forward, closing the distance, her hands moving with lightning speed to clinch his upper body. Seagal tried to redirect, twisting his frame into the circular motions of Aikido, but his balance faltered against her low, powerful center of gravity. In an instant, she had secured an underhook and swept his leg, sending him stumbling. Though he didn't fall, the stagger alone was enough to ignite the crowd into roaring approval. The chants began, first small and scattered, then swelling into thunder. "Ronda! Ronda! Ronda!" Seagal's jaw tightened as he regained his footing. His hand adjusted the hem of his gi, buying himself a moment to recover his composure. He raised a palm as though to calm the crowd, then addressed her again. "Strength without wisdom is reckless. You may throw me once, but you will learn nothing from it." Still she remained silent. Her only response was a slight tilt of the head, a predator reading the weakness in its prey. Seagal lunged again, this time with a full-speed attack, aiming to lock her elbow and force a takedown. The cameras caught every detail as his hand clamped onto her arm. For a fleeting second, it looked as though he had succeeded, his technique precise, his movements flowing. But Ronda's body adjusted, rolling with the pressure. She reversed the lock with an explosive twist, her hips powering her momentum, and suddenly Seagal found himself bent backward, his wrist trapped in a submission hold of her making. The arena erupted. The referee rushed forward, but Ronda released him on her own, stepping back with hands raised, a clear demonstration of control. Seagal shook his wrist and glared at her, his cheeks flushed beneath the bright lights. From the commentary booth, one of the announcers could barely contain himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was no choreographed move. That was pure live grappling technique, and Rousey just proved she can dismantle Seagal's Aikido hold in real time." Seagal attempted to mask his frustration with another speech. "This is not a competition. This is education. You see what happens when an opponent resists recklessly? It looks effective, but it is dangerous, flawed." He was cut short as Ronda surged forward again, ignoring the commentary of his ego. She clinched, transitioned to a hip throw, and with devastating precision, sent the larger man crashing onto the mat. The thud reverberated through the arena, echoing in the stunned silence that followed. Seagal rolled to his side, struggling to rise, but Ronda stepped back, hands low, eyes steady, giving him the chance to recover. The crowd exploded once more. Chants of her name drowned out his earlier supporters, the wave of sound shaking the walls. Celebrities in the front row leapt to their feet, even the martial arts veterans in the stands, men who had long dismissed women's place in the ring, nodded in acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. Seagal rose slowly, his face a mask of contained fury. "Do you think this proves anything?" he hissed, his voice caught by a nearby mic. "You are still nothing but a television fighter, a showpiece for ratings. Martial arts belongs to those who understand tradition." Ronda finally spoke, her voice calm, steady but carrying across the arena with the weight of truth. "Martial arts belongs to anyone who earns it." The words struck like a blade. The crowd roared louder than ever, the chant of her name surging like a tidal wave. Seagal rattled, launched forward with surprising speed, his hands sweeping toward her collar in an attempt to destabilize her posture. But this time Ronda didn't evade. She caught his arm, stepped into his frame, and with flawless technique executed a judo throw so clean and powerful that Seagal's body arced through the air before slamming onto the mat. The impact echoed like a drumbeat of finality. Before he could rise, Ronda followed through, transitioning seamlessly into an armbar, her signature submission. She locked it in perfectly, her hips raised, the joint hyperextended. Seagal's face contorted, the pain undeniable. The referee rushed forward, shouting for the break, but she already released him before the call. Rolling gracefully back to her feet, she extended her hand, offering him the chance to stand with dignity. The camera zoomed in as the audience leaned forward, breathless. But Seagal ignored her hand, pushing himself up with effort, his pride refusing the gesture. His glasses had been knocked askew, his hair disheveled, his breathing heavy. The announcer's voice rose above the noise. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you have just witnessed is history. Ronda Rousey has not only silenced her critics, she has redefined this arena tonight. This is no longer a question of gender, or tradition, or legacy. This is proof." The crowd roared so loudly the very rafters shook. Ronda bowed once to her opponent, then turned to the audience, her expression calm, her composure unbroken. She did not raise her fists in victory. She did not shout. She simply stood, embodying the quiet strength that had carried her from the start. In the front row, journalists scrambled to send their stories live. Headlines were already forming, words sharp and unforgettable. Seagal humbled. Ronda redefines martial arts. Silence breaks the noise. Seagal retreated to his corner, adjusting his GI, his expression locked into a mask of defiance. Yet the truth hung in the air, undeniable, captured by every camera, every spectator, every person watching around the world. His arrogance had collided with authenticity, and authenticity had prevailed. Ronda walked calmly from the mat, her silence intact, her mission complete. The chants of her name followed her down the corridor as the arena reverberated with the echo of something greater than victory. It was not just a match, not just a demonstration. It was a statement carved into history, proving that respect could not be denied, no matter how loudly it was dismissed. And as the lights dimmed and the cameras cut away, the world knew it had just witnessed the fall of arrogance and the rise of something far more enduring. The echo of the crowd still seemed to vibrate through the corridors long after the arena had emptied. The chants of Ronda's name, the thunderous applause, the gasps and cheers at every decisive movement, had left behind an energy that lingered in the air like static. Outside, the Las Vegas night was alive with conversation, with fans retelling the moment when Seagal had crashed onto the mat, when Ronda had locked in the armbar, when her silence finally broke with the words that carried farther than any insult. The Strip's neon lights reflected in the windows of passing taxis as passengers leaned forward, animatedly discussing the fight that was already being hailed as a cultural milestone. Inside the arena's backstage area, the mood was starkly divided. On one side, Seagal's entourage gathered with strained expressions, whispering furiously as they shielded their master from prying eyes. He sat stiffly in a folding chair, head bent as a medic examined his arm, but his sunglasses were back in place, the familiar armor to cover the storm beneath. The assistant tried to speak, to offer consolation, but Seagal silenced him with a sharp gesture. His pride was bruised more deeply than his body, and though he tried to maintain the mask of composure, those close enough could see the cracks. On the other side of the building, Ronda's room was filled not with noise but with quiet pride. Her coaches and close friends spoke in low voices, giving her space even as their faces radiated satisfaction. She sat on the bench, towel draped around her shoulders, still breathing evenly as though she had just left training. A small smile flickered across her lips as one of the younger fighters approached timidly, clutching her program like a relic. "You showed us all," the girl whispered, her voice shaking. Ronda reached out, took the pen offered, and signed without hesitation. But her eyes lingered on the girl's face, and she said softly, "Remember, it's not about shutting someone up. It's about proving to yourself you belong." The girl's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, clutching the signature like a shield. In the media room, the storm had already begun. Journalists crowded around their laptops, fingers flying over keyboards as headlines poured onto the internet. "Seagal exposed," read one. "Ronda's silence speaks louder than Seagal's words," said another. Social media lit up with clips of the match. The first slip of his balance, the judo throw that sent him flying, the armbar locked in with merciless precision. But more than the techniques, the words replayed endlessly. The single phrase Ronda had chosen to speak. "Martial arts belongs to anyone who earns it." It was already trending worldwide. Commentators dissected the event with gleeful urgency. Some focused on the technical aspects, analyzing how Ronda had dismantled Seagal's holds with ease. Others leaned into the cultural implications, speaking of how she had crushed not only an opponent, but a long-standing stereotype. Television hosts debated whether Seagal's reputation could survive the humiliation, while sports networks replayed the match on loop. In living rooms across the world, families sat glued to their screens, witnessing a shift in how martial arts was perceived, not just as tradition, but as a living, evolving discipline that could not be confined by ego or gender. Ronda left the arena quietly, her hood pulled over her head, slipping into the night without fanfare. Her silence remained her companion, but the weight of the moment pressed upon her shoulders in a different way now. The world had seen her not just as a fighter, but as a symbol, and though she hadn't asked for it, she carried it with the same discipline she carried every fight. Her coach walked beside her, saying nothing, only glancing once at her profile as the limousine door opened. She climbed in, settled into the seat, and let the night's chaos fade behind tinted glass. Meanwhile, in the upper suite of a hotel on the Strip, Steven Seagal sat alone before a muted television. The replay flickered in silence, showing him thrown again and again, his technique undone before the world. He poured himself a drink, staring into the glass as though it might offer an answer. The commentator's words scrolled across the screen in subtitles. The fall of arrogance. Seagal's legacy questioned. He clenched his jaw, the muscles tight beneath the shadows of his face. Yet one moment seemed to draw his eyes again and again, when Ronda had extended her hand, offering him the chance to stand with dignity. He had refused it then, but now in the isolation of his room, that refusal weighed heavier than the throw that had put him there. The next morning, Las Vegas awoke to a new narrative. Billboards displayed her face, not his. Magazines ran features declaring the dawn of a new era in martial arts. Sports radio buzzed with callers debating the symbolism of the fight. Some argued Seagal had been disrespected. Others claimed he had been exposed. But the majority praised Ronda's composure, her silence, and her ability to let her skills speak where words had failed. For Ronda, life shifted subtly yet profoundly. Invitations poured in, interviews, endorsements, appearances. But she turned down most of them, choosing instead to return to training. She understood the danger of fame, how easily it could twist into ego, and she was determined not to repeat the mistakes she had just witnessed. Her words to the young girl replayed in her own mind. Proving to yourself you belong. That was the path she chose, and it guided her away from spectacle back toward discipline. In the months that followed, stories began to circulate of Seagal retreating from public life. Some said he had doubled down, refusing to acknowledge the loss. Others whispered that he had begun training in private, humbled by the exposure. Rumors spread of him teaching small classes, stripped of cameras and theatrics, rediscovering the roots of the art he had once claimed to master. Whether truth or myth, his legacy was no longer in his control. The world had shifted, and his name now carried the weight of the night he had been tested and found wanting. But for Ronda, the legacy was different. She had not sought to humiliate. She had not needed to speak more than a single sentence. She had allowed the truth to unfold naturally, one throw, one lock, one demonstration at a time. And in doing so, she had redefined not just herself, but the place of women in martial arts. Her silence had become the loudest voice in the arena, echoing long after the lights dimmed and the seats emptied. Weeks later, she stood at a seminar in a small dojo far from the flashing lights of Las Vegas. The students were young, some boys, some girls, their GIs wrinkled and their belts tied in clumsy knots. She watched them practice, correcting their movements gently, guiding them with patience. When one of the girls hesitated, glancing nervously at the older boys beside her, Ronda crouched down, meeting her eyes. "Do you think you belong here?" she asked softly. The girl nodded timidly. "Then prove it to yourself. That's all that matters." The room was quiet, the lesson absorbed not in applause or chants, but in the stillness of understanding. And in that small dojo, far from the neon lights and roaring crowds, Ronda's true legacy unfolded, not in defeating Seagal, not in headlines or viral clips, but in inspiring the next generation to see martial arts not as spectacle, not as ego, but as a discipline open to all who were willing to earn it. And though the world would remember that night in Las Vegas as the fall of arrogance, it would also remember it as the rise of authenticity, a moment when silence spoke louder than words, and when one fighter's discipline reshaped the future of an entire tradition. The legacy was no longer Seagal's to guard. It belonged to the art itself, carried forward by those who understood what Ronda Rousey had shown under the blinding lights of the arena. That true strength is not about never falling, but about rising with dignity, about proving through action what words can never capture. And as the sun set over the desert horizon, her name continued to echo across the world, not just as a fighter, not just as a champion, but as the one who reminded everyone what martial arts had always been about. If you enjoyed this story, don't stop here, hit subscribe so you never miss the next showdown. We've got even bigger legends and untold clashes coming your way. Click on one of the videos on your screen right now to dive into the next incredible moment. And don't keep this story to yourself, share this video with your friends so they can see what really happened when arrogance met reality.